Hey everyone, and welcome back. So this entire weekend has been flooded with news coming out of Afghanistan, and today we just got further updates that the Taliban have entered into Kabul, and this video is showing Taliban fighters inside the Kabul palace. And for those of you that don't know, Kabul is the capital of Afghanistan. The president of the country has fled, and U.S. diplomats are on the run. I find this incredibly sad because after decades of U.S. military presence and trillions of U.S. taxpayer dollars down the drain, we're back at square one. Which begs the question, what were we doing in Afghanistan? Why were we there? And I thought I would take the time today to go over a brief history of just that. Now, obviously, there are so many more details regarding this story. And for those of you that are interested, I will post the 4-part article. I actually have one of them pulled up here, but I will post the link to the 4-part article in the description below. Feel free to review that during your own time, but I'm going to make this as concise as possible. So back in 2001, shortly after 9/11, the U.S. implemented Operation Enduring Freedom to liberate the Afghan people from the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and capture Osama bin Laden. Now, if you take a look at Afghanistan, on the surface, it honestly does not look like there's much going on there. Kind of seems a little random to be going out there. You got a bunch of rugged mountains here. You have sand dunes here. I mean, what was the appeal for going there? Especially when you consider the fact that even to this day, there is no legitimate evidence that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were involved with the 9/11 attacks. And to understand that, we have to go back to 1971 when the U.S. ditched the gold standard entirely. This was at a time when the U.S. was spending an incredible amount of money, one of the main reasons being the Vietnam War, and other countries who had entrusted their gold with the U.S. started realizing that, wait a minute, you guys are spending way too much money and the U.S. dollar is not as valuable as we thought, so we're going to be taking back our gold. And they started doing this in such rapid fashion that the U.S. realized what was going to happen, and they essentially shuttered the gold window. But because the dollar was no longer anchored to gold, they had to find something else to anchor it, give it credibility. And that's where the petrodollar comes in. A couple years later, Henry Kissinger, who was the state secretary at that time, made a deal with the Saudis that the Saudi government would denote all their oil transactions in US dollars. And then shortly after, a lot of OPEC nations followed suit. So all of a sudden, you have all these oil producing nations transacting in US dollars. And as everyone is aware, oil is essential in like every country. And in order to get that, you have to use US dollars because all these oil producing nations are transacting in dollars. And that gave an incredible boost and credibility boost to the US dollar. And essentially that's what kept it from going into a hyperinflationary scenario. Now that worked out for quite some time until the disruptions started happening. So back in 2000, Saddam Hussein in Iraq had decided that they were no longer going to transact in dollars for their oil. They're going to use euros instead. And of course, obviously, this upset the US because that is a direct threat to the petrodollar, and as a result, the world reserve currency status of the US dollar. Shortly after the US military invaded Afghanistan, they also invaded Iraq, which is funny because there's no proven evidence that Saddam Hussein was involved with the 9/11 attacks. Yet they came up with all their reasons of why it was justified, and they went in there anyways. And we know that Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death. And not so surprisingly, after all this happens, in 2003, Iraq re-enters the oil market and switches transaction of their oil from euros back to dollars. Do you see what's going on here? That takes us back to Afghanistan. Afghanistan just happens to be sitting on top trillions of dollars of mineral wealth. And this has been the fascination of empires for decades. And whole wars and occupations have been implemented to secure these resources because, after all, whoever controls the access to these resources have power. In the US's case, they would be able to denote those transactions in US dollars. And not only in minerals, but also oil. This whole area here is rich in oil and natural gas reserves. And at the end of the day, that is the main reason. It's not about a war on terror. That was a means to justify the US military presence in the region. But in the end, it was all because the US government wanted to keep up its endless spending. And in an effort to do that, they wanted to be able to control these resources to give more credence to the dollar. And I find it funny because Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. And one of those empires is the Soviet Union. They had a large military presence in Afghanistan before. Shortly before their fall, they withdrew their military presence because of turmoil in the motherland. And you can draw a lot of parallels here because in a sense, the US is also having a lot of turmoil at home. And at the same time, the US is withdrawing its military presence in an absolutely embarrassing fashion. And all of this happening on the 50th anniversary of the US ditching the gold standard. The symbolism could not be greater. Will the petrodollar fall soon? I think so, because without the US military presence in Afghanistan, I think you're going to have a domino effect going on pretty soon here. And like I've said before, I believe the dollar's days as a world reserve currency are numbered. And I think that's coming very soon, faster than a lot of people expected. So we'll just have to see. Anyways, that is all for me. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.